On June 6, 1944, more than 132,000 Allied troops stormed the beaches of Normandy. 23,400 more landed from the skies. It became known as D-Day, the major turning point of World War II. But it almost never happened. Why? Well, try getting 3 of the biggest personalities in history to agree on something at the same time. In September of 1939, Britain officially entered World War II. In 1940, Winston Churchill became Prime Minister, standing alone against Nazi Germany. Across the sea, Britain's close ally, the United States, remained neutral. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt yearned to support his friend, but for the American people, it was a different story. Traumatized by the Great Depression and the horrors of World War I, most Americans favored isolationism over intervention. But they couldn't remain isolated for long. On December 7, 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. Neutrality was no longer an option. Less than 24 hours later, Congress declared war on Japan. By the end of the week, Germany had declared war on the US. From the beginning, US President Franklin Roosevelt and British Prime Minister Winston Churchill agreed on one thing. An Allied victory would require a massive invasion of mainland Europe. They just needed to get their other ally, Russia's leader Joseph Stalin, on board. Back in the Soviet Union, Stalin was getting slammed, fighting the Nazis in the Eastern Theater. Attacking mainland Europe and diverting Nazi troops to the West could ease pressure on the Soviet army. So, Stalin was in. But opening a front in the West was easier said than done. Internal pressures, lack of resources, and constantly changing circumstances pushed back the date for a Western invasion. And there was another problem: Japan. The US had its own war in the Pacific that required ships, landing crafts, and troops. They just couldn't provide resources to launch a successful attack in Europe. Instead, Roosevelt's advisors proposed Operation Sledgehammer, a plan to seize ports along France's northwest coast and then conduct a major invasion in the spring of 1943. Churchill's team countered with Operation Torch. The Americans would invade Northwest Africa, relieving British forces defending the Suez Canal. Churchill argued this would improve relations with the increasingly impatient Soviets and lift Allied morale. The Americans agreed. A large-scale attack on mainland Europe would have to wait. But it couldn't wait long. Stalin was getting desperate. If Churchill and Roosevelt took too long to offer military relief for Russia, Stalin might call for a peace agreement with Hitler. Roosevelt still couldn't commit to a mainland invasion, but in January of 1943, he agreed to invade the soft underbelly of Europe, Sicily. The Allies overran the island, but once they crossed into mainland Italy, they were bogged down with high costs draining resources. The rough terrain with fierce German resistance in southern Italy eroded morale. In November 1943, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin met. They could no longer wait to invade France. The time was now. Allied generals Dwight Eisenhower and Bernard Montgomery suggested a plan: Operation Overlord, a full-on invasion of Normandy. Stalin saw it as the only way. Churchill was skeptical. He feared it would be a heavy and hazardous adventure, paid for with human life and blood. But he agreed. The plan was risky. It hinged on cooperative weather and the element of surprise. If the Nazis caught wind of their plan, the Allies would undoubtedly suffer a violent defeat. Hitler knew an invasion of France was coming. It was only a matter of when, where, and how many. So the Allies set up an elaborate campaign of disseminating misinformation in an effort to trick the Nazis. And on June 6, 1944, Hitler was caught off guard. 132,600 American, British, and Canadian forces landed on 5 beaches along the Normandy coast of France in the largest amphibious military assault in history. An additional 23,400 troops landed inland by parachute or glider. The fighting lasted until September. While the plan was an ultimate success, Churchill was right. On D-Day alone, over 4,000 Allied troops were confirmed dead, and thousands were wounded or missing. The total casualties for the invasion included nearly 37,000 Allied dead. their efforts were not in vain. By the end of September 1944, all of northern France was liberated. 7 months later, Allied forces would finally defeat Nazi Germany.